an hour and a half this afternoon. It's designed to help companies and individuals to get work by tendering. Today, the session is getting you started. Next week, as John said, we're going to go into a little bit more of the detail about how to put a tender document together. But my job today is to give you an introduction. And who am I? Well, I'm a former civil servant. Hard to believe, about 50 years ago, this very week, I joined the Department of Industry and Commerce as a very junior official, a young executive officer, and I've moved my way up, went to Brussels, was in Brussels for 20 odd years in the permanent representation and with IBEC, and I'm back in Dublin now 20 years doing consultancy and advisory work for the public sector. We have two businesses, Bid Services, which is the company that I'm representing today. We help companies win tenders. We do exactly what it says on the tin. So if you're a tenderer and you come to us and you're tracking or wanting to win a tender, we work with you to win that tender. We write content, we advise on strategy, we help design the document, we physically put the document together for you. So it's a wraparound service. We also work with the public sector, and quite a few people on the call are buyers, are contracting authorities, and we work with contracting authorities through our company Public Procurement Services to help public bodies design, write, evaluate, process, and get through contract close very complicated tenders. We do the smallest of the small and the biggest of the big. I'm working on one tender at the moment for 3,000 euros. And yesterday I was working on a tender for 650 million. So we do everything in between. So we bring to tenderers the perspective of what the public sector is looking for. Myself and my colleague Mary, who'll be training you next week, work both sides. So we can give great insights to tenderers to what the public sector is looking for. And understanding what the public sector wants is very much part and a critical part of this game. We're in two parts. I'm going to take you through essentially getting registered on eTenders, which is the government's portal for tendering. And Mary next week will develop up your skills. This session will take about an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half. So what we will do at the end of this, hopefully, you'll be able to register on eTenders. And as a consequence, you will get push notifications for every single tender in the area that you're interested in for free. So the effort involved in registering on eTenders basically means that you will, as a consequence of this, get every single tender above 25,000 euros that's published. And we'll also talk a little bit today about identifying tender opportunities. Obviously, if you're interested in tendering, you want to know where the money's been spent and how to access tenders. By the way, I like to be interrupted. So if anyone wants to say anything during the next hour or so, just unmute your button and come in and ask a question. I'm very happy to take questions at any stage during the course of this presentation. This is here for reference. We have published on our website, bidservices.ie, a 9-module e-learning program about tendering and procurement. So obviously, for quite a few of you, it's probably a bit too early to be looking at this, but next week and the week after, when you have a bit of time, not going to the Christmas parties means there'll be plenty of extra spare time. It's broken down into different areas, in particular, where you get information, how you write a winning bid. And next week, we get into some of this, but that's available there as a permanent record. There are 9 half-hour modules. The only downside is you have to listen to me. But I'm sure you'll manage it.
There's another statement I'm told from GD Tours, and basically they said they cancelled the trip in the last 15 minutes. Now, the word currently, I think, is the word, these trips are currently not in line.
Is there somebody trying to get in?
There's people unmuted, Peter. That's what it is. We can hear their background noise.
The Joe Duffy. Fair enough. That's understandable. Okay, I'll continue. Why would you tender? Read this slide and have a big think about it. Now, did anyone on the call realize that the procurement market in Ireland is worth 150 billion euros. And we're in, quote, a recession. The procurement market isn't in a recession. Last year's budget, the October budget statement, increased significantly the amount of money that's going to be spent by the public sector by a significant margin. And the level of tendering activity that's going on at the moment is at near record levels. As I said earlier, we work with the public sector, and there are more tenders coming out now than I think I've seen in quite a while. The split of that 33 billion is very interesting. About 10, maybe 11 billion is the public capital program. And that would include things like retrofitting, housing, social housing, education, small scale hospitals, roads, things like that. That's 10 billion. 8 billion is spent by our commercial semi-state companies, the Irish Waters, the ESBs, the An Posts, the harbour companies. And about 14 or 15 billion is spent by departments, local authorities, and what are called contracting authorities. That's the name given to public bodies. This is an enormous marketplace, and there's therefore no surprise that a lot of tenderers who are registered are very busy people at the moment. And we can see this. There are significant numbers of responses coming in to tenders that are issued. And the reason why people are interested, there's a long-term pipeline of potential work. This isn't something that's going to be turned on and off. So if you're in the tendering business and you're trying to sell, for example, your training services, there would be a pipeline of work for 4 or 5 years for training. So it's not going to be something that'll just be there for 1 month and not there. This is long-term pipeline of work. These are the people who tender. There are 3,000 contracting authorities. You'd be familiar with them all: government departments, local and regional agencies, the health service, including hospitals, education at primary, secondary and third level, state companies, non-commercial state companies. There's a voluntary, the charity sector, local community groups for UFIT, and the Gardaí and the Defence Forces. And this may seem to be an enormous spectrum of potential target audiences, and it is. What you need to do if you're tendering is to narrow your focus, and narrow your focus quite dramatically. We usually recommend, when we talk to tenderers who are getting into this game for the first time, is to focus on 3, 4, maximum 5 potential opportunities. So how do you do it? You find out who's who in the organization you want to target. Who is the housing officer for Meath County Council? If you get the IPA directory, you'll find out. Not only you'll find out, you get their email address and their phone number and their title, whether there's a at level X within the organization. The IPA directory is a must read if you want to find out who's who across the entire public sector. So if you're making a proactive phone call to a local authority or to an education and training board or to a hospital, the people you need to contact are listed in this directory. And you can get it online. I gather from next year, they're putting it out by way of an app. I prefer the hard copy, I must say, but we're all going electronic. So all the decision makers in Ireland who take decisions about tendering are available and contactable on this particular book. Everyone in the country who gets state funding has to procure, without exception. I think this Ireland Secret Service are the only exception, and we have a very small Secret Service, I believe. They're so secret, nobody knows about them. So if you're in receipt as a body of state funding that contributes to your overhead, and even you mightn't be a state company, you are required to go to procurement to get your goods, services, and works. For example, IBEC are in receipt of Exchequer funding, and they are required as a business organization to procure for their SkillsNet programs. An awful lot of local and community groups get grants from local authorities or from charity groups. They are required to tender in most circumstances for what they're looking for, without exception. And that's the reason why the market is worth so much, is worth 33 billion a year, because everything has to be tendered, has to be procured. The rules, and we talk about these in more detail next week, the rules are very simple for low value tenders. And the higher the value the tender gets, the more complicated the rules become. And over what's called the EU threshold, the rules are indeed complicated. But for the vast majority of the social enterprises that we're talking to today, you will be looking at primarily lower value contracts to begin with. And for these, the rules are really simple. So for example, if for example, Meath County Council need a trainer for 3 or 4 days for enterprise development, they will literally issue an email or make a phone call to 3 suppliers who say, what's your price? And all you have to say is 2 and 6pence. And as long as your 2 and 6pence is the cheapest price, you get the gig. No paperwork, or it'll be a short email based primarily on price. And that's for contracts under 5,000. For contracts between 5,000 and 25,000, typically a local authority or a procurement officer will send a short document, a very short document out to 3, maybe up to 5 potential providers. It's not published anywhere. It's below the radar. So thousands and thousands of contracts of valued below 25,000 are published every year, and nobody sees except those in the know. And those in the know are tenderers who are registered with the relevant contracting authority. So when the Meath person responsible for training issues a training tender for Meath, he knows he's got 3 or 4 training providers in the County Meath that he can send his tenders to. Or if he doesn't know that those tenderers exist, he'll go into Google and search around the country looking for suppliers. Under 25,000, contracting authorities have total discretion to give you local suppliers and local social enterprises the first opportunity of bidding for low value contracts below 25,000. So, but you must be known to the person who's in charge of the budget. So you just don't sit there and wait for the tender information to come your way. You have to be proactively telling your target buyers who you are, what you do, and how you can get on their shortlist. The rules for low value are very simple. Over 25,000, it gets a bit more formalistic. The documentation is a bit more complicated, and everything over 25,000 has to be published on the government's website, e-tenders, that I'll talk about a bit later. So when we talk to potential tenderers and social enterprises for the first time, we say, cut your cloth probably pretty low in the first instance. Look for low value tenders. 3,000 euro tenders will grow to 5,000 euro tenders very soon. Then you soon be winning 25,000 euro tenders, and you grow your business as you get the correct reference sites. But if you go in and try to win 100,000 euro tender and you've no track record, you haven't a chance of winning it. So you have to basically tender and bid within your comfort zone initially and build up your capacity. The system in Ireland is, like in other European countries, is incredibly transparent. There's no shortage of information. Tenderers over 25,000, everything is published. The documents are in the public domain. The only thing that isn't transparent are under 25,000 euro tenders, where, as I said, they go to a very, very limited audience. We have a regulator, although they don't like to be called a regulator. It's the Office of Government Procurement. It's a centre of excellence. There are over 200 people in the Office of Government Procurement, which is basically an office within DEPR. And they do nothing from Monday to Friday other than run tender competitions. So they are a great resource for the public buyer. And I know there's quite a few public buyers on the call. They also have a tender help desk, which I'll talk about now in a minute. So there's a great resource there available for you tenderers who want to start participating. So in summary, I think social enterprises as entities need and must be registered on e-tenders, but the individuals that you work with should also be registered as sole traders, because they will have skills, competences, and experiences that can be sold as subcontracting. And getting subcontracting opportunities is also a great way to win tenders. So for example, you see the county hall is going out for catering. Now the county hall, whoever wins that tender probably needs 15 people. And if you were a experienced chef or a sous chef, or you could work with that, you knew, and you're spotting your tenders, you get work because somebody else wins the primary contract and you come in and get the subcontracting of the employment opportunities. This is one of the websites you need to become familiar with. This is the website of the Office of Government Procurement. It sets all the policy documents out that you need to be familiar with, and you will over the next couple of weeks get used to reading and becoming familiar with these documents. All the latest news and gossip and circulars and whatever, the Office of Government Procurement keeps this website up to date on a very regular basis. Quite a few of you, as I said, are buyers. So they have a buyer zone, which is exclusively designed for the contracting authorities. And you can go in there and get access to frameworks and framework and template documents and things like that. OGP publishes quite a lot. As I said, the system is very transparent. It publishes, there's a framework, a policy that determines who can do what and how procurement should be run. But the document on the right, which is the Public Procurement Guidelines for Goods and Services, if there's nothing else you do between now and next Thursday, when you go on your next webinar, have access this document. If you don't get time to read it, it doesn't really matter, but just become familiar with it. If you only just read the first 2 or 3 chapters, because you get used to the language. It is incredibly well written. It's one of the best written documents I've ever come across in the public sector. It is clear, absolutely cogent, aimed at somebody who knows nothing about tendering or public procurement, and it takes you through the system in a systematic, logical way. So if you understand the rules of the road, you're way past first base in terms of understanding what tendering is about. If you drive a car, you have to have a driving license, and you need to understand and pass a test, which is called the rules of the road. If you're tendering, you also have to understand what the rules are, and that's available on the Office of Government Procurement website. And you're getting a copy of all these slides, so you'll be able to check them out after today, after the presentation this afternoon. I mentioned there's no shortage of information. If anything, there's too much information. There are literally thousands of tendering opportunities in any one year. I'd argue up between 9,000 and 10,000 tendering opportunities. And one of the biggest single sources of tendering opportunities is our Project Ireland 2040 programme. This is a €116 billion public capital programme that the government announced 2 years ago. And in doing it, they have published a whole series of supporting documents where you, as a potential tenderer, can find out where the contracts are coming from. You take the document on the left, which you can access, it's hyperlinked. Every single county in Ireland has a project, dozens of projects. So if you're in Roscommon, you will be able to find what projects are active or in the pipeline in Roscommon. And if you find a project that's in the pipeline, you can say, for example, the National Roads Authority or the SEAI or a local authority to say, I see you're expanding a school. What's the story here? Who's the primary contractor? Who's tendering? And you might become a subcontractor. You may not be the primary contractor, but you should always look, as I said earlier, at subcontracting opportunities. An absolute array of information broken down by sector and also accessible at county level. And to make life even easier, our good friends in the Department of Public Expenditure have what's called a project tracker. If you look down there on the left, every single project in Project 2040 is described in some detail and more or less a state of play, exactly where the project is listed. And this is updated every 3 months. So if you're providing employment or want to work in the construction industry or service the construction industry with products or train the construction industry or to get involved in retrofitting, and I'll talk about retrofitting in a while, there is a constant flow of information about potential tenders. The government are reviewing the public capital programme next year. While it's at 116 billion, it's certainly going to go north of 120 from what I'm hearing. So there's a lot of information available. And as I said, you don't need to be the primary contractor. For many of the smaller organizations and for individuals, you target these opportunities at local level as a potential employee. For example, there's a wind farm being built by Bord na Móna. How can you become part of the team that's going to build it, design it, monitor it, or project manage it? What supplies do they need? Do they need catering? Do they need accommodation? So all of these issues, every single major capital contract comes with opportunities. It's your imagination that limits or defines what you can do to get a share of this particular project. So to be successful in tendering, you do need to understand the rules of the road. That takes a little bit of time. It will require you reading the document I referenced earlier. You don't need to read it all. Mary will cover, my colleague Mary O'Halloran will cover all the basics for you next week. You do need to target who you want to work with. And you don't have to target people in your immediate geographical area. If you're offering senior services to elderly people or pensioners, it doesn't have to be in the county. Your service could be offered anywhere else. So you're not confined to your geography. And also, if you want and are very good at what you do, you could well say, well, I'll collaborate with another company in another county. And between the two of us, we can do the work of three. Then if we get a third person, we'll work of 4 or 5. And this is particularly important for something like retrofitting. But the government is now out for tender, looking for what are called a one-stop shop for a primary lead to do retrofitting at local level. And there's no reason as to why some of the companies on this particular call can't become that one-stop shop by collaborating with other social enterprises across Ireland to create economies of scale and a company of scale that could actually capture a significant percentage of this market. Retrofitting, to my mind, is one of the areas that's going to grow and grow. There's a commitment in the programme for government to spend 9 billion euros in every county in Ireland, in every parish in Ireland. There'll be 500,000 houses to be retrofitted with a budget that's guaranteed. It's going to be paid for by the carbon tax. So you might as well try and get something back for the tax you're spending. And it's ideal for small construction crews or people with skills who have trades who can help those who are trying to do this major project. They estimate there'll be something in the region of 30,000 jobs created over a period of 10 years as this program is rolled out. And as I said, yes, question coming in? No. Going then. So that's an opportunity. And for example, as a supplier, as a tenderer, on your own, you're not going to become a one-stop shop. You're not going to become a main contractor. And the trick is to find a group of other people when, as a combined effort, you have economies of scale and collectively you get work out of it. You will get very frustrated with the process unless you understand the rules. An awful lot of you spend a lot of time, I imagine, filling in grant application forms, which can be very frustrating. Procurement or tendering is a bit like that. We teach and train companies and social enterprises not to bid. You only put a tender in if it makes sense. You only put a tender in if it's absolutely related to what you can do. If you try to put a tender in to do X and you only do A and B, you won't win the tender. And if you do, it's too risky. So you need to tender within your comfort zone and your experience zone. You also need to research. If you sit down and expect somebody to phone you up in the morning to say, Peter, here is a tender opportunity, would you like to bid? It doesn't work like that. You're going to have to be proactively targeting the public bodies in your county or your geography or your sector that have budgets. And you need to go and tell them what you can do to help them spend their money. I'll give you a practical example. I'm here in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown. All county councils publish their budgets in December into January. They are publicly available. I will know in 3 or 4 weeks' time what the budget for training is in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown. So you go to the head of training in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown or any county council to say, well, I am a social enterprise group in your county. We have facilities. Would you like to use them? Or we have trainers. Would you like to use them? Or can you use and work with us in the area of enterprise development? You have €6 million to spend this year. How can we help you spend it? Now, they will tell you they have to go to tender, which is, they're the rules, but at least you're identifying the terms of reference of a piece of work that if it's tendered, you have a good opportunity of winning. And that's what you need to do for an awful lot of small value tenders. You need to be proactively telling people who've got the budgets that you exist. So when they have the discretion to put a tender out under 5,000 by only a phone call, needs be, or an email, or under 25,000 for a 3 or 4 page response document, your name is on that list. So who are the 5 public bodies in your area that you'd like to start talking to? You don't need to decide now, but when you go into the training next week, bear in mind and have a think through before you go into the training, who would I like to target? And how do I go about it? And Mary O'Halloran used to work, she's retired now, used to work in the National Procurement Service, is extremely experienced at managing and dealing with public procurement officers and knows every trick in the trade. Will you bring your practical examples to Mary and she'll be able to give you guidance? Another part of tendering, which we'll explore over the next couple of weeks, is you don't need to tender on your own. And some of the cleverest tender winners that we have worked with have been consortiums where 2 or 3 individuals might get together, or 2 or 3 social enterprises might collaborate. One becomes the lead tenderer and the others basically are in a supporting role, and you bid for a significant piece of work. And it is commonplace for groups within a certain area to bid in a collaborative way. And it's common, very common. A lot of companies in the private sector would feel uncomfortable about that because they'd be sharing intellectual property to some extent. But in the social enterprise sector, where you've all got common goals, there's no reason as to why you can't collaborate in a much more proactive way. This program is designed to help you upskill in the tendering space. And next week and the week after, and indeed talking to John, there'll be activities in the early new year. So in fairly short order, I would hope those of you who see the opportunities of tendering, we'll have you skilled up and we'll have you bidding proactively within a few short weeks. I will say, and I keep on repeating, tendering is not for everyone. There may be 50% of you on this call who say, "No, that's not for us." That's okay. And what we will do is we'll pick the companies that are really, really interested and take them to a master class in the early new year for those who believe and it fits their organization's value system that they want to tender. We will take you forward and make you as competent and as able to submit compelling tenders as is possible. The last point is one of the key outputs today is getting registered on e-tenders. You cannot receive tender notifications or submit a tender unless you're registered. And I'm going to take you through the tender registering process, which is very straightforward, as you'll soon discover. Bear in mind now, the entire slide deck is going to be made available to you, so you'll be able to see step by step how we do this. So before I get stuck into going down how you get registered on e-tenders, are there any sort of general queries or questions that you'd like to ask about particular opportunities or how your organization might target a local or several local public buyers? Any queries? John, do you have access to everyone's chat box?
Hi, Peter. This is it's Robert here. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes. Look, I was just kind of going back to the other thing, the IPA, the directory. Where do you get hold of that, or where can that be? Is it, obviously, is there a
Just Google IPA. It's a yearbook. It's called the IPA yearbook. You Google it, and it's available online. So if you register online with the Institute of Public Administration, they're here in Lansdowne Road.
Yeah.
You order and they post it out to you. It's about
Yeah.
€7.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's it. So, but yeah. It's not excessive. It's not 150 whatever. Yeah.
It's also a diary as well. It's I've been getting the IPA directory, as it's called, 1974, and it's a great reference work. You get all the names of the ministers and the diplomats and the heads of the civil service, all the local authorities, housing agencies, health bodies, anyone who's a who's who gets a mention in the IPA directory, so you can track down the decision makers.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Any other questions before we mosey on? The webinar format doesn't lend itself to questions, I know from experience. Okay, well, if that's the case, do interrupt if you wish, and I've no problem taking questions at any stage. So you have to unmute your button and just speak and we can hear you. So I'll mosey on then. eTenders is the government's website for tendering. Every country in Europe has an eTenders, which is a portal or an internet site. And this site contains information about tender notices. You can do a notice search, as you can see here. And what you're interested in is this particular button. So to get notices pushed to you free of charge, you need to be registered. And you need to be registered correctly. An awful lot of the 48,000 suppliers or tenderers that are registered on eTenders are not registered correctly. Now, hopefully after this session, you'll be registered correctly. And when you're finished being registered, you will be able to get tenders pushed onto your email once a day for every single area that you're interested in business, free. And they come in.
Peter, sorry, can you show us where the button is? I can't see a button.
Yeah, there's supplier company registration.
Oh,
Can you...
grand, thank you.
That's the button there. So in the morning or overnight, they send the tender notices out. So if you're interested in, say, training, every single tender that relates to training will end up on your inbox every morning. Well, I'm a real sad lad because my poor wife has to put up with me every morning over breakfast and having your orange juice and the bowl of flakes. And I say, oh, you'll never guess who tendered today. So that's part of the course of our morning's conversations. I talk tenders from 8 o'clock on. She's forgiven me at this stage. But you do get these notifications bright and early. So before you start your day, you know what's in the mix if there are tenders in your area. So I'm going to take you through what are in effect a series of screenshots. So basically, when you press a button, this is what you see next. And as I said, the slides will show you where to go. So you press the supplier company registration, and this is what you see. Get registered. So you put the name of your company. It's a menu, it's a drop-down menu. You're a company limited by guarantee, you're a partnership, you're an individual, you're a private limited company, you're a DAC, whatever. You just register your company names and you'll see, you'll see here, there's an asterisk. That means the information is compulsory. So you will not be allowed to leave these sections empty. You basically scroll down and there's a drop box here. What type of business are you in? Are you a trainer? Are you in construction? Are you into social services? Whatever. You put your company name. If you have a VAT number, you put your VAT number. If you don't, you put your company registration office number in. Forget about the Duns code. That's called a Dun and Bradstreet code. It's not compulsory, so forget about that. You can see it's not asterisked. you're an SME. Everyone in the country is an SME. There are 900,000 registered companies in Ireland, and most of them are SMEs. You put your address, your postcode, your city, your country, if it's Ireland, and you put your description of your business. This is the most important box of all. I'll come back to this in a minute. That is the most important box. You go down the form, who is the point of contact? The e-tenders will only allow one person per company to be registered. In the past, up to fairly recently, there were multiple addressees within companies. They've stopped all of that. So they will only allow one registration per company. So think very carefully as to who is going to get these emails. Is it yourself? Is it the boss or somebody you're working with? You'll get one person will get the emails. You put your phone in, your email in, you move down the page, you put your first name, your role if needs be. You don't have to complete that. Your preferred language, Irish or English. You move down, save, put your username, probably the company name, your password, confirm your password, go down here, press save, and all of a sudden, after about 2 minutes of completing a form, and it's the same as a form you fill in for Ticketmaster or booking an airplane flight, it's no different. After about 2 or 3 minutes, you're ready to go. You're registered on e-tenders. You'll get this notification, your registration is now complete. Now, you would be told, I deliberately left something out, which is I didn't complete my company profile. So you will not be allowed to complete the entire process if you leave a section of the registration out. So you're now registered or nearly registered. There's a small piece missing, which we'll come to in a minute. You get a push notice to say, here is your login, here's your password, press the login button, bingo, you're now registered. It took you all of 3 minutes. You now will have access, you're on the way to getting access to 32 billion euros worth of tenders published in Ireland every year. And it took you 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Obviously, like everything in the world, it has its T's and C's, terms and conditions. I never read them. So you just go down here to the bottom right hand, accept the terms and conditions, close your eyes, and hopefully the solicitors won't chase after you. And you get your homepage. You have your own homepage on e-tenders. And if you look to the left column, every tender that you want, that you're working on, will be here. You click this button and it opens up the notice for tenders on e-tenders. You can put your documents, you can do your reports. And down here, which is really, really important, is a phone number and an email for what I call tender support. So if, for example, you run into a trouble uploading a document or getting access to a document, you can phone this number. And unlike some telecommunication companies, you would actually get somebody to speak to you immediately. I was onto the e-tender support yesterday, got through in, I'd say, 10 seconds. And the girl who was helping us with a live tender was so helpful. This is a really, really good support. It's available for buyers, the public sector, but it's also available for suppliers, tenderers. Now, we haven't completed our business profile, so that's what I want to talk to you about now in a minute. I'm the procurement officer of Meath County Council, and I have a requirement for training. And I will want to give my training contract to somebody who is physically in County Meath. How do I know who to go to? Well, one of the ways is having a descriptor here. I'm Company X, I'm a social enterprise based in Kells. We have a training center, we offer training, and we have trainers, and we have people to train. So you put your description here as to what you have. So when the procurement officer wants to see, is there something local that suits his or her requirements, you've basically told them what's what. So don't be shy in terms of explaining your business. And 500 characters is quite a lot. I put down here, in our own way, we provide procurement advisory service, support and procurement training to contracting authorities. I put in the wrong box, of course, but this is the box for if it was Oscailiga, I should have put it in the box up here in English. But my description is available to anyone in the public sector to scrutinize and to see. So if they're looking for procurement advisory service, they know the bid services or public procurement service is a company and it's ready and available to offer public offer tendering. When you're doing your registration about your business, you might indicate your turnover. If there's production, if you're a member of a trade association or an organization, you might put it in. If you have a web address, what contract values are you interested in? That's very helpful to the procurement officer in Meath County Council or whatever county council, because if, for example, you say you're not interested in contracts above 25,000, you won't be asked to bid for contracts over 25,000. So you can indicate maybe 100,000 as the upper limit. If you've got certifications, you fill them out. And most importantly of all, you press the save button. The save button takes you on to the next page. And you get a summary of your registration. Simple. You can edit it. And this morning, 2 or 3 people asked the question, say, for example, our business changes or I'm doing something different. At any stage, you can change your profile. You can change the company name. You can insert a new VAT number. You can delete this. And at any stage, because you've got password access, this is your page. You can change it at any stage. So it's very flexible. It's easy to complete, and it's also very easy to change. So you move on. You're now set up to on eTenders. You're not quite. There's another step to go. You want to have a conversation with your spouse over breakfast about all the current tenders, but you can't do that unless you manage what's called business alerts. These are the alerts that are sent to you. They're pushed to you from the system once a day. So in other words, if you're into training, every single training tender will end up on in your e-box overnight. You can have a lovely conversation about it in the course of your croissants or cornflakes, but you have to set yourself up to get that information. And to do that, you go to the next page, you press the done button down here, and you go to the next page and you press this button here, start using business alerts. And you press done and you're taken on to the next page. It's very simple. One page leads to another. You have to include what are called CPV codes. I'm going to explain this. This is probably the only bit that's somewhat complicated. Every single category of a supply, service, or works in the entire European Union has an 8-digit number, broken down by high-level numbers and smaller-level numbers. So for training would be an 8-digit number, but within training, there'd be training for fire safety, for health and safety, for audit, for procurement, for IT. There'll be a huge, huge number of sub-codes. So what you need to do is to capture all the codes that are relevant to your business. And the way you do it is very straightforward. You go down the page and you put in the search box here, training. And what will pop up will be all the relevant codes that refer to training. And all you do is tick, 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 tick the codes that are relevant to your business. Very simple, and they're automatically registered on your profile. So for example, in my line of business, I ticked 4 codes. And every time I ticked them, every time procurement or training was mentioned, I ticked the code. Now, if they're not suitable, you can untick them. If you want to get more areas, you include more. Now, you have to be very careful what you're looking for. So if, for example, you're providing services to the elderly or to the disabled, you have to be sure that do you tick in that box, or do you tick the training support box, or do you tick the activities box? So I'm inclined to register much more widely than you might be tempted to do. So in other words, over-register the procurement codes rather than under-register them, because sometimes the public sector doesn't tick the right box, and if they don't tick the right box for procurement software, I won't get the push notification under that category code. So the category codes are easy to find. You just do a Google search on them and you tick the ones that are relevant. And if you discover after a couple of weeks, perhaps you need to change it, you just go back in, password protected, get into your profile and add more codes or subtract more, if as the case may be. You could well see you're getting a lot of notifications for, and here, procurement software packages, no interest to you really, and you just turn it off, and that can be done. So you can tailor the push notifications you get every day, and you get this by way of experience. So all of a sudden, what you do again, press the done button, and you move on to the next page, which will show you that these are the CPV codes. You can see they cover everything under the planet. And the very last one is community, social, and personal services, which is, for you, a lot of you, would be the most important one. So within that, that's the master code for the sector, 980000-3. Within that, there'll probably be 100, maybe 150 subcodes. And you pick the ones that are relevant to you and experiment with them. Some of them may not be relevant with experience, others you may want to add. And I would always err initially on ticking more boxes rather than fewer. So if you're into education and training, education and training is separate from community. Health and social work services. So you could be in the health and social work services and social and personal services, and cultural as well. And quite a few of you are into recreational services as well. And some of you are into environmental services, a lot of recycling companies in on the call. So just be careful, you check the lists. As I said, you'll be Google searching and you'll be prompted just literally to click, click, click on those relevant codes. And at our session next week, if any of you are still struggling by this time next week, Mary will, or indeed myself, will be able to help you out. And if there's any issues, you'll have my email at the end of the session. If any of you are struggling with the registration, you just contact us and we'll help you get registered.
Peter, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you register twice, say as an individual independent contractor and as a member of a company?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But the reason why the Office of Government Procurement got a bit shirty about this was say for example, you're in an accountancy practice, they might have 20 people registered in KPMG. They only want one person to deal with. So they basically say one registration. But if you have your social enterprise as an entity registered, you as an individual could register separately. Say for example, your social enterprise is looking after, in the probation service, you have individuals who have great skills or talents that might be experienced in catering or construction, whatever, they can register quite separately. And that's the beauty of this registration. Individuals can register. And if they have to set up a company, you help them set up a company. It doesn't take that long to set up a company and the costs are very small. So yes, to your answer, you can set yourselves up as an organization, and you can also set yourself up as an individual supplier. Some public sector bodies also register as tenderers. For example, if IBEC put a tender out for SkillsNet training, there's nothing stopping a public sector body bidding in for that work. So some public sector bodies are registered as tenderers, although they are public sector. So, it's not just exclusively, there's a limited number, but some do both. So now you can see here, you're all set up for your business alerts. So what happens next? You get a notification from our good friends in eTenders, automatically generated. This is the email I used to say you're confirmed, you're set up, the system is working. Next happens, you get the following morning over your cornflakes, you get an email that looks like this. And this is what you discuss with your spouse. And you never guess, there's 3 tenders out today. Wow. One for the Offaly Greenways. Now, I'm going to give this as an example. Offaly County Council put a tender out a few weeks ago for a feasibility study. Now, you're not going to be bidding for the feasibility study as a social enterprise in Offaly, but you're very interested in what the outcome of the feasibility study would be. Why? Because you've got people in your social enterprise that could run or equip or construct some of the capital works or the services that are going to come out of this. So while you're a tenderer, you're not going to be bidding for this opportunity. You now see an emerging opportunity. So when this study is finished, it'll come with a €5 million budget. And you would want to be in talking to the development officer in Offaly County Council to say, when this feasibility study is finished, can I have a copy? I'd like to see what's involved. And I will be putting a consortium together to build the Greenway and to service it with bicycles and do whatever else. So you see this as an opportunity, not for an immediate tender, but something that's in the pipeline, and you go chasing after it. And the county council development officer says, Peter, you're far too small. You can't do this on your own as a social enterprise. Find some friends. Go to the next county. You don't have to be just based in Offaly to bid for this. Find somebody within your network who can help you. And typically, because you're all networked with each other, you could say, we're thinking of going after this Greenway facility in Offaly. Has anyone else got similar experience? Can they help us with it? And that's a great way to get tenders, is to collaborate and look for partners. And that means that you are of a certain size and scale. And one of the barriers to training is that you don't have the turnover. But if you add your turnover to 2 or 3 other people's, the public sector is required to accept all of the aggregation of people's turnover. So you typically will get to the turnover if you have a bid team. So there's a mentor panel. Wow, we're in Monaghan, the local Leo in Monaghan. We're a social enterprise based in Monaghan. How can we get on this mentor panel? Could we become a mentor? Would we want to be mentored? Would the mentoring panel help the social enterprise in Monaghan achieve its objectives? So those 2 tenders, those 2 notices, you may not be tendering, but you're being alerted to about an opportunity that exists that could benefit your organization. And I'm just going to open up the last one, which is RTE's Learning and Development Services. So you see this appears over your cornflakes and croissants and coffee. You press the hyperlink, bunk, this page pops up. And the page, look, the look and feel is the same for all tenders. And it tells you, remember we talked about the CPV codes? There they are there on the left. They're the ones that RTE have used for education and training. You see the tender response time. You've got your contact. Mark Karen in RTE is the person to talk to. It's a services contract. You want to get the documents. All you need to do is to click the accept button, and that will bring you to this page. And you go down here and you review the request for tender, and the documents, bingo, appear. And you just click and the documents are yours to review and respond to. And all of a sudden, having been registered, having received a push notification, the following morning, you're now bidding to provide learning and development assistance into RTE. I rest my case. Seems simple, it is simple. Bidding itself is a bit more complicated, but getting the tenders, getting them pushed to you, getting access to the information is fairly straightforward. And I hope the presentation over the last hour or so gave you that impression. And as I said, we'll be giving you the full slide deck, and the session earlier today was recorded, so we'll give you an audio link to it as well. I've been talking for an hour. I haven't been hearing many questions, and I'm sure there are a few.
I have a quick question for you, Peter, please, if I may.
James.
Thanks a million. Could you maybe just do a little recap on the smaller tenders, the under 25,000 euros, please?
Absolutely. The national rules are that every tender over 25,000 has to be published on e-tenders. It's compulsory. So no public body up to 3,000 that has a tender valued over the term of the contract, more than 25,000, it has to be advertised on e-tenders. So the 48, 49,000 tenderers who are registered potentially will be bidding. Under 25,000, the procurement officer, say from Meath County Council, has total discretion as to who he's going to send his tender for training to. Typically, he will have 3, maybe up to 5 potential tenderers will get a short document a short tender response form with some contractual issues, and they will be sent out at the discretion of that procurement officer to the 5 companies he believes can do the tender for training. Now, how does he find out the 5 companies who do the tender for training? Well, he can go into he can search the CPV codes to discover there's X 100 companies train. Then he can check using the addresses that only 5 of those actually live in County Meath, and he can pick those 5, and he's total discretion to send the tenders, that low value tender, to local suppliers only. And most public bodies don't realize this. They have complete discretion to give local contracts locally. I mentioned this morning, I was invited by, I referenced Meath several times because I'm a big fan of their procurement officer. They ran an event several years ago with the local enterprise board, and they basically brought in as many businesses that were registered to the LEO into the town hall in Navan. And there was such a demand, they had to do 2 sessions. The first, there was 140 people in the room, standing room only. And the procurement officer stood up and said, we spend 65 million euros a year on discretionary procurement in services, supplies, and works. And only a fraction of that is going to local companies. Why? You're not registered on e-tenders. And we spend and issue hundreds of tenders under 25,000 euros, and we don't know who the local suppliers are. So could you kindly register on e-tenders and start talking to us? So that's keeping money local. And that's really important for social enterprises. So you need to talk to the public bodies who have that degree of discretion in your location. The county councils will be the obvious, but their education and training boards spend a lot of money locally. Hospitals spend an awful lot of money locally. The Gardaí spend a lot of money locally, and an awful lot of significant state companies have local offices. So your job for these under 25,000 is to talk to, if you're in the business of training, is to talk to the head of training for Meath County Council and go and say to them, here's your budget. I know what your budget is because I've just read the budget. It was on the website. It's just been approved by the councillors at their meeting in December. We can give you value in the following areas. These are 3 areas for community development training. I know you haven't done it before. We have a premises available. We have trainers available. And the output would be X, Y, and Z. 20 people being upskilled or reskilled to do whatever. And he would say to you, oh, we have to go to tender. He said, yeah, it's under 25,000. And you can send it to us and 2 others, and we will win it because we're good at tendering. But we know you have to tender. That's not a problem. I'm just bringing the opportunity to you. Now, not every procurement officer will be as enlightened as my good friend in Meath, but the public sector are trained to listen to local suppliers and to do their best to help local suppliers. And the deeper circular on social considerations in tendering is all about that. It is helping public buyers who've got significant budgets, where it's possible for low value tenders, to spend the money locally. Your job is to help them spend their budget. There's nothing worse in the public sector, as you all know well, at the end of the year having money left over. So your job is to convince the public sector that you give them value by putting in professionally written and competitively priced tenders. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
And believe you me, it works. Tendering has a reputation as big, huge tenders for roads and big IT systems and national broadband. That's at the top end. There's about 1,500 tenders a year are at high value, only 1,500. There's probably 10,000 under 10. We don't know the figures because nobody's ever published them. There are probably 10,000 opportunities under 25,000. That's where all the work is. And you're all, social enterprises are ideally positioned for those low value tenders. Who else is? You've got the networks, you're helping to train and upskill people who've got fantastic skills. And the trick is to get them involved or get them employed through these local opportunities.
Peter, can I ask you a question as well?
Yes, please.
Hi, it's Eric here from Step Up Ireland. I'm just wondering as well, I was advised before about pilot projects and that you don't need to go through a tendering process if it's a pilot project. Do you know anything about that?
Whoever gave you that advice didn't give you the right advice. You have to tender for everything, even if it's a pilot project, with one exception, which I'll come to in a minute. The rule is that any public expenditure has to go through a formal procurement route. The only exception is what's called the innovation partnership. So if you had a pre-competitive, you're engaged in pre-competitive research, and a local authority didn't quite know what they wanted. Say, for example, they were testing a new piece of energy efficiency kit, and they didn't want to purchase 2 million euros of this. They wanted to test it out on 2 or 3 rows, say LED lighting. They might give you a small scale contract to test a particular product or service. That they can do without tendering. But as it gets and becomes commercial and clearly commercial, or as it scales up at that point in time, they must tender.
Right, okay, thank you.
Quite a few don't, but they should. There's a big difference between what they should be doing and what they get away with.
Sorry, can I come in there? I was interesting to hear you saying, which I didn't realise, that you have the discretion to go local for, say, I procure stationery and I'm coming from the other side, but I was taught that I was obliged to look for the lowest tender, and quite often the local companies wouldn't be able to match the big stationery companies, for example.
It depends. If you're looking for low value tenders, we haven't got into this, but the Office of Government Procurement have what they call frameworks in place, including stationery. And for some really high volume products, they will ask you to not tender locally, but to go into a national tender. Now, typically those tenders are for purchases over 25,000.
Okay.
There are exceptions. For anything lower than 25,000, you can do your own thing. But if you're forced to go into a procurement for over 25, if you justify that you can find 3 local suppliers that you believe can supply competitively, you are not obliged to use the national framework, but you have to justify going local.
Okay.
Justifications could be the circular we mentioned earlier, which is that there is and now I wouldn't say a discrimination, but a positive discrimination in favor of social enterprises. That could be one of the justifications. But the OGP rule is, if there's a framework in place, you must use it, unless you can justify otherwise. And one of the reasons to justify otherwise is quite frequently the OGP, they're inundated with work. And as well possible, you have a requirement for supplies for a school or something like that, and they can't deal with your tender for 6 months, but you need the supplies in 6 weeks. So that would be another justification for publishing a local tender.
Okay, and once it's under the 25, I have the discretion to go local.
Yes, yes.
But I would still need to justify that I'm getting good value for money.
And the way you do it is you make sure that the 3 or 4 local suppliers you pick, you get 3 or 4 bids in, and they're bidding against each other on price, and that's what determines in large measure who gets the contract for something like print and stationery. There obviously have issues about making sure you get good quality, but for something like print and stationery, it's largely determined on price.
Thank you.
And you can get a template. Mary, if you talk to Mary next week, we have a template for procurements under 25,000. We can send you a copy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
It is not as complicated as the big OGP tenders, which run to nearly 100 pages of lovely legal language drafted by the Chief State Solicitor's Office. These under 25,000 tenders are thin. They have legal terms, T's and C's, but they're not as complicated.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any more questions?
Hi, Peter.
Yes.
How are you? Very informative, I have to say. I'm learning loads. This is a question about the Department of Health. Just recently, they have announced in budget 2021 a 5 million fund for women's, it's called a women's health fund. And what I'm looking for is how to find out how one can apply for part of that health fund by the Department of Health. So what would be involved there, Peter?
Well, if it's a grant scheme, it won't be tendered. You'd be like anything else. You fill an application form for a grant. So if it's a fund just to make, say, I don't know what the terms and conditions are, 5,000 euros per project or whatever, that would be a grant application, which is not tendering. That's completely separate.
Okay.
And you'd have to, obviously, for any grant program, there are eligibility criteria and there would be assessment criteria. It depends which unit in the HSE is running it. And if you go into use my good friend, the IPA yearbook, you'll probably find out who the director of communications is, or who the head of women's affairs in HSE, or the budget holder is the person to talk to. Anytime you're looking for a tender, talk to the person who's in charge of the budget, because they have total discretion as to what happens or doesn't happen. Now, off the top of my head, I don't know, because I haven't seen this particular funding opportunity. But the budget holder is the person to talk to.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
HSE have also a customer care email and customer care contact points, and use these a bit like the tender advisory customer care. They're all public bodies are really, really good at handling and helping you answer and get questions to you. So I don't want to give the names of my personal contacts in the procurement side of HSE, because they probably are not involved. They're too busy doing COVID procurements and things like that. But the IPA directory might be a way, even Googling it, but get to the budget holder.
Okay, great.
Every single tender or grant opportunity, get to the budget holder, not the boss, the budget holder. Quite frequent.
Emer here. Thank you again for the presentation. It's very informative. I'm wondering if you could give me a little bit of clarity on what you would distinguish between procurement and commissioning.
Commissioning?
Yeah. Similar to not the HSE, but say TUSLA would be going down the road of commissioning. And they're very stringent in saying it's not procurement, but I struggle to see the difference between commissioning and procurement.
Commissioning what?
Services.
That's procurement.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
If they're spending money, the Secretary General of the department would be very interested to find out that they're not procuring. The Controller and Auditor General has censured, not just TUSLA, just generally would censure a public body if they circumvent the rules. And the rules are, if you're spending public money on services, they have to be tendered. It has to be done in a transparent way, subject to a full notice being published. If, for example, TUSLA were hiring somebody and they were issuing an employment contract, they do not need to tender. So if you're recruiting, you don't need to tender. You just basically go through the recruitment process. And you don't need to tender, for example, if you're leasing a building or renting a building, that's outside. There's quite a few exceptions to procurement, which I haven't got into, but they would be some of the exceptions. But if you're running and they want to provide 10,000 person hours in a county in terms of TUSLA support to help children in, say, County X, that would have to be tendered. Now, another exception would be if, for example, they wanted to give the job to another public sector body that was specialist in this area, you don't have to tender between public bodies. So how are they to know there's nobody in the private sector can do it? So if I was advising the Secretary General or the accounting officer of that department, I would say I would err on the side of procuring, and you get better value for money. The main justification, if they had 10,000 hours to spend, it could cost them €1 million, but they went to tender, it might only cost them 650. So all of a sudden they've 350,000 more to spend on more hours somewhere else. So if you're talking to the TUSLA people, tell them that Peter Brennan fella said they should be tendering. I'll stand corrected.
Hi, Peter. Can I just ask you something about, startups like new social enterprises? is there any requirements for how long you would need to be running, or any experience behind you or anything like that?
Two aspects of that question. The OGP has issued circulars to all public bodies basically saying be as friendly as possible to startups and to small firms. You could be a small firm, you've no records, you've no accounts. That should not be a barrier to tendering for small scale contracts, shouldn't be at all. But what is a barrier is you don't have the relevant expertise. A long time ago, a business friend of mine said, Peter, you're very good at knitting, but now you're trying to do sewing. Sewing is not the same as knitting. You may think it is, it's different. So if your expertise is in knitting, stick to knitting. So a lot of small firms, when they set up, scatter themselves in terms of their expertise and probably start tendering for some contracts that are out of scope or out of their capacity. But being a startup is no inhibitor. They still have to go through the e-registration format. You notice there's no requirements to submit accounts. All you have to do is put a VAT number. They don't even look for your PPN number. So that happens subsequently. So it's very easy to set up on e-tenders as a startup company. And if, for example, an individual sets up as a, say, for example, you're in the creative area, you're an artist and you wanted to do X, and tenders come out for art forms and art products. You can't do it yourself. Get 2 or 3 pals to work with you. One of them is the lead contract, will sign the contract, and everyone else helps the lead contract. So individuals on their own, if they feel in any way inhibited, and one of the tasks of the social enterprises that are on this call is to help individuals collaborate to get tenders using your supports. And the system is set up to be as facilitative as possible for individuals, startups, regardless of their experience. But you won't win tenders unless you have the relevant experience.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Lots of questions, a few more.
Peter, I'm going to come in and just ask you, it's a bit of a tandem, but do you provide advice on the management of consortiums?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have what's called a teaming agreement, which I've used dozens of times. In other words, if a tender, I'll give you an example. We didn't win the contract. Years ago, I was phoned up by an Australian company and they said, we want to come in and bid for a Garda Síochána tender. And we need to find an Irish contractor, which we found. And they in turn found 3 subcontractors. And we put what was called a teaming agreement for all 5. It was for the speed cameras. We lost, of course, thankfully. But it's normal when you're putting a group together that you would have some sort of a teaming agreement. So when everyone knows what's going on, who does what. But when you have a group together, it is the primary contractor signs the contract with, say, TUSLA or whoever else. All the subcontractors also have to sign a declaration to say that they're not bankrupt and they comply with the rules of the competition and whatever. And that, for most cases, should be sufficient. And only in the very largest contract would you actually need a legal form of collaboration or a teaming agreement. Most contracting authorities will not look for one. It's a matter for the suppliers themselves to be organized. It could be as short as possible, but for small scale contracts, you really don't need to go down the hassle of signing legal documents. The small scale contracts are designed to be, they're usually of hugely short duration and can be spent and invoiced quickly. So with teaming agreements would be much, if you were pitching into TUSLA for a 4-year contract with 6 contractors, absolutely have a teaming agreement. But for something smaller, I wouldn't bother. Okay. I'm very happy if you're involved in a live tender you send me an email, you have my email address. I'm very happy to share our teaming agreement with you.
Thank you.
We can't give legal advice, but I gather a lawyer looked at it, so it's pretty robust. It stacks up.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Don't leave the call now and say, God, I wish I'd asked that fella that question. Are you comfortable about registering, basically, which is the initial first step? And a lot of the social enterprises that are on the call, you have a lot of clients, individuals that you're working with, absolutely handhold them to register. And hopefully by this day next week, when Mary is doing the training about taking our knowledge base from today into a stage where she's going to take you through how you put a tender document together and how you submit it and the do's and don'ts. That's what the next course is about. And I understand from Siobhan and John in the new year, we will do a masterclass for companies that really want to take this tendering business to the next level. And it won't be for everyone. You have to recognize that. But this is an introduction to tendering. You may come to the conclusion very quickly, this is not for us. It doesn't fit what we're doing and whatever. So it would not be at all unusual that the fall off rate of interest in this would be X. That's to be expected.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question about the registration process?
Yes.
The social enterprise that I manage is under the name of parent organization, and it would be them that has the company number. So when I'm registering, which name do I put down, or do I say the parent organization's name trading as Renew Enterprises?
You could put the parent name down, but you put your name down as the contact.
Okay.
It means you get all the information. You get all the push notifications. They
Yeah.
don't. Your boss doesn't, or whoever it is. But
yeah.
And if you're tendering, it'll be in the name of the company, but you get the notifications.
Okay. Perfect.
Or
Yeah,
you decide to set up a separate company, you can put that in as well. So, but it's one per company. That's the rule.
Okay.
And it's understandable that the system was overwhelmed with, I think there were 80,000 people registered at one stage, and they've now got that down to about 48,000.
Okay.
And I should add, e-tenders is being changed. The functionality of e-tenders is going to be dramatically improved. Its ease of use, its hands-on arrangements is also going to be changed in the course of the next 6 to 9 months. So the look and feel of e-tenders will be quite different. There's a tender going out for the re-tendering of e-tenders by e-tendering companies who can tender e-tender tenders correctly. So if you could fit that particular skill set, you can apply and bid for the tender. So e-tenders will be looking slightly differently in about 6 months' time. There must be some more questions, surely, of a Thursday afternoon.
Peter, I don't have a question, but I just want to say that if we do have any more questions, we know where you are at 8 o'clock every morning, so we'll reach out to you then.
Emails before 9 o'clock, but you know where I am at 8 o'clock. Okay, well, I'm going to do my auctioneer on it, going once, going twice, going 3 times. But seriously though, if you're going to get the slide deck, we're making arrangements for the session this morning, which is very similar, has been recorded, and you have another session next week. And if you want and you really are interested, we have our wee book, which I've mentioned, which is a textbook, and we've got our 9 modules up. It's free of charge on our website, Bid Services. So if you want to do basically a 9-module course over the next month or 2 or whatever, that particular collateral is there and it's free of charge. And that'd be of particular use for maybe some of your clients or the people you're working with if they want to upskill themselves at their leisure. It's an easy enough thing to access. John, do you want to conclude?
I will, Peter. I'd just like to thank you very much, Peter. It was a great, very informative session, and you did a great job. And just you were very clear. So I think there was probably very few questions at the end because people didn't have any questions. So clear. Now I will.